If you have followed my channel for the last year, you know that I've talked at length in some of my videos about the disposability of men to society. This goes back to the beginning of time. And this is where we get the idea that women and children should be saved first. And men have always been used for those tasks that nobody wants to do. You know, whether it's fighting wars or picking up toxic waste or, cleaning the bottoms of ships in the water or unplugging drains at the bottom of dams or God knows what. I mean, there's some terrible, terrible jobs out there. And we men are the ones who do it. Despite equal rights, no women have been volunteering for many of these very dangerous jobs. So today, I want to talk about the disposability of men. And some of what I'm going to tell you today is going to shock you because it did me. And it's going to enrage you because it did me. So let's talk about it. In the United States, every year, there are 5,000 occupational deaths that occur. Now, 5,000 isn't a big number. And, 5,000 people dying, if it all happened in one place at one time, it would be a national, tragedy. It would be, and if it was done by terrorists, my God, we'd start a war. We would have, the military mobilized and ships and planes and troops shipped all over the world to fight these terrible bastards. But here in the United States, on the job, 5,000 people die every year, and about 4,500 of them are men. Now, if these were 5,000 women dying every year, or even 4,500 women dying every year, we would hear about it. Oh my God, there would be telethons, there would be fundraisers, there would be political action committees, there'd be people marching in the streets, for God's sake. But when 4,500 men die on the job because of occupational hazards, nobody says a word. Most people don't even realize it's a thing. Remember on 9/11, I think it was like 3,500 people, 3,500 Americans died on 9/11 on that one terrible day. Well, every year, 5,000 American men die on the job, and nobody lifts a finger to do anything about it. Why is that? Why don't people realize that? Because men are disposable. That's why. This next statistic is very, very concerning as well. So 21 out of 10,000 American men are homeless every year. And they're not just homeless, they're unsheltered. That means that there is no room at the shelter for them. Women and children do get priority at public shelters, and men definitely get left out in the cold. Men make up about 3/4 of the homeless and unsheltered population. I think last year that 21 number compares to 8 out of 10,000 women. So men make up the vast majority of homeless people. But there are very little services made specifically available to men. They do exist in small numbers in some states, but widely speaking, and when we talk about the homeless population and the homeless problem in America, there are very few programs put together specifically to help men. Now, everyone is willing to step up and help women and children, but for some reason, homeless men are seen again as disposable. Part of it has to do with our male culture and our male approach to problems, and we blame the men for their own downfall. We don't see it as a failing of society like we do with women and children. We see it as an individual failing of that man, like that man failed, and so he just pays the price for his own actions. And I just don't think that's necessarily valid anymore. I just don't think that's necessarily true because so many of the cards are stacked against men these days. I have a lot of compassion for guys that are stuck out there on the streets on a freezing cold day trying to stay warm and get their next meal and can't find a warm place to sleep at night. But our society as a whole doesn't seem to be quite as concerned. Now, if that man was an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child, people would be bending over backwards to accommodate him and to find a place for him and to save his life. But because he's a grown-ass man, nobody gives a damn. Nobody gives a damn about his life. Why is it his life has less value than a woman's life? Why is it his life has less value than a child's life? I mean, they're all lives, right? When are we going to start putting, or when did we start putting value on people's lives and determining that we'll save this one and let that one die? Because that's basically what we're doing as a culture. Some issues in our culture get an enormous amount of attention. And when you first hear about it, you think, wow, that issue does deserve a lot of attention, because certainly a lot of people are suffering there. And breast cancer is one of those issues that certainly most people, men included, would agree that, yeah, we definitely need to be doing whatever we can to cure cancer, especially breast cancer, because it, disproportionately affects women, and it's a terrible loss to people's mothers, their grandmothers, their sisters, their wives. I mean, it's terrible suffering, and nobody wants to see people suffer. And we all believe that if we can find a cure for breast cancer, it would be a good thing. So we dedicate billions and billions of dollars to curing cancer, and specifically breast cancer. We have Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We have all the sports teams wearing pink ribbons and pink shoelaces and pink shoes and talking about breast cancer during the commercials. And it's just a big national movement. We have walks to prevent breast cancer and to cure breast cancer. It is a national movement like very few diseases ever get. Well, 19.3 out of 100,000 women get breast cancer every year. And that is a terrible, terrible number. It really is. But when you compare it to the 22 out of 100,000 men who commit suicide every year, it's like, wait a second, what are you talking about? 22 out of 100,000 men commit suicide every year. That is like 5 times the number of women who commit suicide every year. Think about that just for a moment. What goes into the thought process, the lifespan, the experience, the total depression, alienation, failure on so many different levels, not only as an individual, but as a society, that would allow that many men to kill themselves? More than 50,000 men every single year are committing suicide. That to me is outrageous. To me, there are no special programs. There's no Suicide Awareness Month for men. There's no special program set up. There's no special science project going on to figure out what's happening. No research going into this. Just like the homelessness, it's one of those issues that our society pins on that individual as a man because he is a man. And that's very, very concerning to me. When you look at the reasons why these men commit suicide, most oftentimes, it becomes really apparent why this happens. Because many of these reasons are not intrinsic thoughts that this man had in and of on his own. He didn't just come up with this. These were ideas and thoughts and concepts that are a part of our social structure that he bought into. And that led to him having so much shame that he felt he could not continue his life as it was. Society has always expected more out of men. In traditional societies or at older times in the past, men were judged specifically how they could physically contribute to society, how their work was measured as a contribution to the well-being of the family, the town, the community, and those same values have been carried forward to the modern day. However, these days, with the job market the way it is, the competition from world markets, men have very little control over their ability to retain and maintain their jobs. Factories close, communities dissolve, and depression sinks in, and men find themselves unable to find a purpose for themselves in lives. And without a purpose, men are useless. And once a man feels like he's useless, well, the inevitable is right there. They tend to want to take their own lives because they don't see any purpose for them to continue living. And that's a terrible shame. But I think that's one of the biggest reasons that we're seeing it happen. Men, particularly here in the United States, find that being self-reliant is something that they aspire to, is something that they identify with. And when they're faced with a problem that they can't deal with, it's very difficult for a man to come to conclusion that they are unable to manage the situation. Men internalize things. We try to put things off. We compartmentalize. We try to avoid facing a lot of the pain. While women will step into their pain, they will ruminate on it. They'll get a therapist. They'll sit and talk about it forever. While men are much less likely to do that for lots of reasons. First of all, men don't find that kind of activity is beneficial to solving their problem. They would much rather take action than to sit and talk about what the issues are. So with these basic constructs of men's psyche in mind, we shouldn't be trying to provide female solutions to male problems. And I think that society says, well, we need to put them in therapy. We need to find social, support for this person. And maybe the social support would work, but having a guy sitting around and talk about why he feels bad about losing his job and why his life doesn't have any purpose probably isn't going to get him to where he needs to go. Probably he needs to find something that he can do. He needs some way to support himself. He needs to find a purpose in life. These days, men are more isolated and lonely than ever. And a lot of that has to do with the evolution of feminism and gender roles, and it has provided a great deal of confusion and frustration for men who are trying to develop meaningful relationships with women for a myriad of reasons. Those relationships are almost impossible for many men to achieve. And I've talked about that at length in other videos. I'm not going to waste your time here with all that. I'll leave a link to a video here at the end, and you can learn all you want about the behaviors of women and why men would struggle to have relationships with them. But that social isolation plays a significant role, and men will oftentimes lean on drugs and alcohol as a way to numb their feelings and pain about the situation that they're in. And the combination of depression, isolation, and substance abuse is just a terrible formula that inevitably leads to the wrong outcome. As a society, I feel like we have failed to address these issues. That's the least I can say. But it's not even we haven't addressed them. We haven't even talked about them. It's like this subject hasn't even come up. It's not that we haven't done anything to cure the problem or solve the problem. It's one of those things that isn't even on the radar of most governments or social structures or service providers. It's something that is flying under the radar, and it is destroying people's lives and destroying our country's fabric. Because when a cohort as large as an entire gender is being ravaged by a disease, a mental disorder that would lead them to commit suicide, to take their own lives, to just step out of life altogether, it's an indication that our society is extremely sick, and we need to take action to start turning it around, not just for the sake of men, because we're just the tip of the spear. This is going to start affecting women too. This is not something that's going away anytime soon. What's ironic about the statistics regarding suicide in men is that it seems to affect young men and old men. So men under the age of 25 have the highest rate, and men over 75 have the highest rate. So at the beginning of life and at the end of life, we are finding it difficult to adapt, to find our place, to become useful, to find a purpose. We're finding ourselves isolated in these two situations. And I, for one, feel like, as a culture and as a society and as a free-speaking people, we need to bring more attention to this issue, because it is it's a national embarrassment. It's a national tragedy that we have allowed this to happen. and we need to do something about it as quickly as possible. So I'm going to leave you with just this final thought. If the suicide rate for women was 4 times higher than it is now, and it matched what the suicide rate for men is, and more than 50,000 women every single year were taking their own lives because of, really what amounts to a failing of our society to find a place for them, there would be outrage. There would be marching in the streets. There would be people on Capitol Hill screaming about it. There would be television shows dedicated to it. News reporters would be all over it. Women would be walking in the streets. They'd be demanding that the government take action to settle this, to help these young men or these young women that were suffering. But despite the fact that more men commit suicide every single year, goes completely unnoticed by our medical community, by our governments, by our social services, is a tragedy isn't the right word, because tragedies seem like they're accidents. And this doesn't feel like an accident. These statistics are well known. So the fact that I and you and the rest of the country is pretty much unaware of this is not an accident. This is something that has been done intentionally. This information has not been made available to us intentionally. Every year, the Surgeon General of the United States issues a statement that talks about the overall health of the American public. And I do not remember hearing or seeing anything about this issue in the Surgeon General's report. Why is that? Why is that? And I'll tell you why it is. This is my belief why it is. Because it's not politically convenient. It doesn't serve anyone's purpose. No one benefits by helping men, at least not so far. So we need to make it politically expensive for people, governments, politicians to ignore these issues. Because if we don't do it, nobody will. All right, you guys. I hope you've liked the video. If you have, please like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay healthy, and if you can, stay single.